try that again. Good evening.
Good evening.
This is our 2014 budget. How exciting. Got the city manager smiling, Jeff White laughing, and Chief Miller looking the other way. So I don't know what to think yet. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started because we posted this at 5 o'clock and it's 5:03. So, City Manager, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Council, this is the beginning of the 2014 annual budget process. We have scheduled a series of meetings starting today and running through the end of this month. We have 4 meetings that are scheduled for sure for budget presentations. Then we have a tentative meeting wrap up if necessary. We're hoping not to need that. We're sitting in a situation that is serious, and we believe that we've put together a process, we've provided the information, we've established an opportunity for you all to understand the situation that impacts our budget, and also we think that we've identified a pathway to making some good decisions. At the end of this, it's very important that we deal with the realities of the budget situation. And as it stands today, there's about a $5.5 million budget deficit in the general fund and about $1 million budget deficit in the debt service fund. We put together a couple of scenarios. One deals with making all of those cuts out of the organization with the exception of the debt service that Jeff can talk about. Number one is that we reduce the expenditures in the organization by that total amount and what the impact is, and certainly it's going to have an impact on areas that we have a very strong level of commitment in, that being public safety. The second is we present a scenario where you could increase the mill levies and excise tax to cover all of that, and we understand that that's not really the most judicious thing to do also. And then the third option is that we could have a hybrid approach. We put together a recommendation that's based on a hybrid approach wherein the amount of money that would be covered by the public safety would be covered by a mill levy. There would also be a portion of money that would be covered by increases in the franchise fees, and then we would cut the remaining amount of money, which in our budget as it exists today is $781,000. The goal during this next couple of weeks, next month, is to provide you an opportunity to learn about each of the departments. What's the size of the department? What resources are being allocated to each of those departments? What are the specific objectives and deliverables that the city derives through the work of those departments? And then at the end of that, engage in a discussion as to if we were to cut, what would those cuts look like? What are the alternatives to the services? If we were to go with a cut, is there another alternative to providing that? And then at the end of this, throughout this process, we're going to capture your notes, and we're going to, at the end of this process, based on direction from you, come back with a finalized budget for adoption, hopefully. So I just want to talk about Jeff White, who's sitting to my left, and his firm, Columbia Capital, and the role that they've been playing. We made some very significant changes in the way the financial operations of the city are run within the last couple of months, and I think it was important for us all to get to a level of having a high level of confidence in the information that was being provided. And while certainly there was some very good people working intently in that situation, we really were just continually struggling with capturing information and putting you in a position where you could make good decisions going forward. So we brought Jeff in because we thought that the situation was so serious and so important, and we needed an objective set of eyes and one who had a significant amount of knowledge with the city's processes and the city's financial situation, having actually been a former employee here and has been operating a very successful financial consulting firm. So at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Jeff. He'll talk about the books that are in front of you, where we stand today, and then we'll get the meeting going. Jeff.
Absolutely.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, a pleasure to be here. At the risk of boring some of the veterans, I wanted to talk about some budget basics and then kind of build to the recommendation that we provided to you tonight. Definitely feel free to jump in with any questions as we go along. That won't bother me at all. So the point of the exercise is the annual budget is the city's foremost policy and planning tool for the year. And that's not just the case here, it's really the case in every city and county across the country. This is probably the only time where we invest this amount of time and energy in thinking about what it is that what it is that we do today and what it is that we're going to do moving forward. Kansas has some statutory rules about adoption of the budget that are perfectly situated to ruin the summer of every city council member and budget manager in the state. The primary one is the state requires us to submit an adopted budget to the county clerk by August the 25th of each year. And the reason for that is that state statute is set out to ruin the falls of every county clerk as they pull all the information together and put together tax bills to be delivered in December. We do have some hearing requirements that we've got to meet ahead of that 25th deadline, and you can take a look at those on your calendar. You'll hear us talk a lot about fiscal year. Kansas does make it easy. Fiscal year in Kansas starts on January 1 and ends on December 31. So when we talk about fiscal year or FY, we're talking about, in this particular case, the budget year that begins January 1 of 2014. One point of that I think is really important to mention, which is that we are going to be making decisions. You are going to be making decisions. We're going to describe recommendations to you that will impact money that's spent in December of 2014, which is 18 months from now. And so part of this process is a little bit of fortune telling, and part of this process is a little bit squishy. So the numbers that you see in the document are our best guess about what it's going to cost to provide services, and our best guess about revenues that may or may not come in for the budget year that won't even start for another 6 months. So, we do budget down to the dollar, but the level of the level of comfort that we're going to hit those individual targets down to the dollar probably belies how unconfident we really are in what that's going to look like down the road. You just don't know 18 months from now how things are going to look. Normally when we talk about the city, we talk about departments. The city's organized by departments. So when we talk about police department, fire department, finance, a budget is organized by fund, and the city has more than 40 of those. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about the general fund. And the general fund's purpose is to finance general government services, including public safety. But there's a lot of other funds as well. Some of those funds the state requires us to have. Some are required by our bond trust indentures. Some are required by generally accepted accounting principles. And others are there for the city's convenience. So we'll focus a lot on a few funds, and a few funds really make up the majority of the city budget. But it's important to remember that when we're talking about budget, we're talking about funds. Some departments cut across multiple funds. Some funds, like the general fund, have multiple departments inside. Budget is primarily funded through revenues that come from a variety of sources. The general fund really has the most number of discrete sources of any fund. I haven't counted. There's probably 100 discrete sources of revenue that come into the general fund. There are some funds that have a single source or only a handful of sources of funds, and there are others that have a mix. But revenues generally fall into categories of taxes, fees for services, licenses and permits, intergovernmental revenues, and in a lot of cases in the city funds, it's actually payments from one city fund to another city fund, such as risk funds and insurance funds and those kinds of things. One question that we hear a lot is, can the budget be changed once it's approved? And for the veterans on the council, you know that there is a process that we can follow to amend the budget during the middle of the budget year. The general rule is that in any fund you can't generally increase the expenses after the budget's adopted unless you've got new revenues that you hadn't counted on. And so budget amendments in this city have been relatively rare in history, and every city approaches those a little bit differently. One thing that can't change is the property tax collections. Once we set the amount of collections that we want the county to levy on our behalf, that is set, it's established, and there's nothing that we can do mid-year to change that. Two of the primary revenue sources we'll talk about, property taxes and sales taxes. Just a quick refresher. Property taxes, as many of you know, are levied on the basis of value of the underlying property. So in Kansas, residential property is generally taxed at a rate on 11.5% of the market value of that property. Commercial and industrial as a rate on 25% of the market value of that property. The city, in Kansas, the city has nothing to do with the valuation of property. That's all done at the county. The county feeds us that information, and the city has no control over, at least in the short run, over what the value of any individual home or business is. Similarly, sales taxes in Kansas, the state levies and collects those taxes on our behalf. Retailers, if you go to Best Buy and you buy a DVD, you pay $10. You're going to pay $10 for the DVD plus the sales taxes on top of that. The state, the Best Buy, the retailer remits that to the state divvies that up and sends those taxes on a monthly basis back to the underlying taxing entity. It takes a couple months for money to get from your pocket at a retailer into the city's pocket in the form of taxes. So it's a lagging indicator, but a much faster indicator than property taxes, where if you think about the potential lag time on property taxes, if you sold your home in February, let's say of 2013, and your sale value was $10,000 more than the value that the county thought your home was worth, that incremental increase in value wouldn't actually show up in the city's pocket until 2015. So there's a pretty significant lag time between what's happening in the housing economy in Topeka and how that reflects in our property taxation. And for that reason, even though we may see the housing economy improving here, it may be another budget cycle or two before that really shows up on our bottom line. Staying on the topic of property taxes real quick, a lot of folks get their tax bill and they think that the city's responsible for all of that. And all of you know that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, in the current year, the city's levy accounts for about 23% of the total levy for a household that's in the 501 district. So between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of $4 in taxes that an individual homeowner pays come here. The largest levier, of course, is the school district, and the county is up there as well. We took a look at a 20-year history of actual levy rates when we talk about the number of mills, and went back to 1993. Took 1993 as a base year, gave everybody's mill rate the value of 100 back in 1993, and then we looked at the percentage change in those levy rates over time. The city's levy rate is actually only about 2% higher today than it was in 1993. So the actual number of mills that have been collected hasn't changed very significantly over the last 2 decades. When property tax dollars come to the city, we divide those 3 ways. There's 3 funds in the city, 3 of the 40-some funds that the city manages that receive property tax revenues. That's general fund, which again we talked about, general government, public safety. Special liability fund, which is a fund from which the city uses to pay legal claims and judgments. And the debt service fund, which is where general obligation bond principal and interest is paid. On the sales tax side, and actually an interesting question came to me today from an outside source. The state reduced the sales tax rate statewide starting today, moving forward. And the question came to me, was the city reducing its tax rate itself? Well, again, when you go to Best Buy, you buy that DVD and you pay 90 cents in taxes, the city only gets a fraction of those 90 cents in taxes. In fact, the city gets a dime on that $10, 0.1%. That money goes directly to the general fund to support general government operations. And then another nickel, half of a percent, that goes to the special street maintenance fund. So that was the dedicated sales tax that the voters approved a couple years ago. The balance of the sales tax is collected, 11.5 cents Shawnee County, and until yesterday anyways, the state rate was 6.3, 63 cents of that 90 cents went to the state. And I think we're down to 6.10, 6.15. When we look, so we talked about how the city's mill rate, the actual number of mills that the city's levied hasn't really changed when we look from 1993 to today. One might argue correctly that, well, that may be true, but the value of the tax base has grown over that time. And that certainly is true, but when we look back in recent memory, we've had a relatively constant mill rate over the last 5 or 6 years. In 2012, and I'm pleased to say we did just deliver a final complete audit for 2012. We collected about $200,000 less in property tax revenue than we did in 2008, which was the last year before the recession on property taxes. On sales taxes for 2012, it was the first time that we've eclipsed what we collected in sales taxes on the 1 cent city levy since 2007, which again was right before the recession. So the city has basically just now gotten back on a roughly even footing when you look dollar for dollar, back to where we were before the economy collapsed in late 2007 and 2008. So it's a pretty stark view of what the revenue trends have been over the last few years. When we look at the general fund itself, which again is a place where we're going to spend a lot of time, and we look at total revenues, about more than $6 out of every 10 comes from two sources: property taxes and sales taxes. So when we talk about property taxes and sales taxes being essentially flat for the last half decade or so, that gives you a pretty strong sense of the challenge of growing revenues at the same pace to match expenditures. Even if we do exactly the same thing this year as we did last year, we have pay increases, we have health insurance cost increasing, commodity prices do go up, those kinds of things occur. If our revenues are flat, if 6 out of every $10 of our revenues in the general fund are flat, it places a lot of pressure on everything else to kind of keep up the pace. When we look at the general fund expenditure side, and we kind of line things up, by the time we've paid for police, fire, municipal court, and prisoner fees, we've accounted for about 76% of general fund spending. So 76% of general fund spending, police, fire, municipal court, prisoner fees. So we could stop these budget hearings tonight after the chief's talk, and we would have addressed about 3 out of every $4 spent in the general fund for the next year. By the time you add public works in there, the required transfer from the city to the county for Parks and Rec and the zoo, you're up above 90%. When you look at pure overhead functions, finance, legal, city manager's office, mayor's office, city council, you're talking about 3 or 4% of the total general fund. So it doesn't take you very long when you're counting departments, if you line them up by the amount of cost, to get to a point where you're really talking about a vast majority of general fund spending. So one of the first things that I did when Jim brought me in about a month or 5 weeks ago is I took a look at general fund revenues year to date and updated some projections, and unfortunately I saw some weaknesses. We saw some weaknesses particularly in franchise fees. We saw some weakness in sales tax. Revised those estimates down and immediately saw that we were looking at a general fund that was not going to balance at the end of 13. We've taken steps internally to fix those problems, and we think we're fine today, although we continue to watch the revenues very closely. But those same reductions in revenues for 13 also cascaded into 14, because honestly, most municipal budgeting is incremental. When you're looking at revenues for next year, you start with this year's, and you hope that you get a little bit of growth. Some revenues grow faster than others, but that's kind of the base assumption. When we had started 14, budgeting to start with 13 collections, which were higher than we're now projecting to have, and so you can see the cascade. But as we built the 14 budget, we asked departments to basically show up with the same level of programs and services that they have in the current fiscal year 13, the one we're operating in today. When we lined all that up and we looked at the revenues that would be available to pay for that, what we saw was a pretty significant budget deficit. In addition to that, in the current fiscal year, the city shifted 2 mills of property taxes from the debt service fund into the general fund in order to balance the general fund. The debt service fund had a very strong cash balance. That move was sustainable for a year. It is not sustainable going forward. So we also had to move that 2 mills back into the general fund. So the recommendation before you on the debt service fund is not only the move of the 2 mills from the debt service fund back to the general fund, but an increase of about 1.1 mills property taxes in the debt service fund to keep that fund healthy moving forward. Unfortunately, those are commitments the council, this council and the council before you have already made. Those bonds have been issued. Those debt service obligations are absolute. The city has pledged its full faith and credit guarantee, which means you've promised to raise taxes as high as you need to in order to pay the debt service on those bonds. So our recommendation is that the levy be raised in the debt service fund to meet those obligations. So just kind of starting off the day, there's a roughly 1.1 mil increase in property tax recommended for the debt service fund to balance that. That leaves us in the general fund, as Jim mentioned a second ago, with a shortfall from balance in fiscal 14 of about $5.65 million. If the council did nothing, approved the budget as it stands today with that deficit in there, we project that we would end fiscal 14 with a negative fund balance in the general fund, meaning that we would have spent every single dollar of cash in the fund balance plus a couple $100,000 more. So obviously not sustainable, obviously not a problem that we can leave here. We felt that fixing a problem of that magnitude was something that required a dialogue. And so that's our starting point for this evening, is to start that dialogue. And Jim mentioned kind of 3 options, right? One is to fix it through revenues. The math works out relatively easy on property taxes. A mill of property taxes in Topeka generates just less than $1 million in gross income, not including delinquencies. We've also suggested potentially increases to franchise fees on gas utilities, electric utilities, and potentially on our own internal utilities, water and wastewater. So with roughly, and again, this is in addition to the 1 mil increase already built into the debt service fund, with roughly a 4.1 mil increase in property taxes, a 1% increase in the franchise fees, we could generate enough new revenue to cover that budget deficit and do exactly what we're doing this year in 14 related to programs and services in the general fund. Another approach would be no new revenue, let's just cut departments. So we took some items that we know that we don't have any discretion over whatsoever. The city has, for instance, a contractual obligation to make a payment to Shawnee County related to the Parks and Recreation transfer. I looked at the contract, it's inviolate. So you have to spend that money. So we netted a few of those items out and then took the $5.65 million and divided it ratably among the remainder of the departments. And it's a pretty dramatic cuts. $2.5 million to the police department, $1.7 million to the fire department. The numbers are smaller for the other departments, but certainly looking at the department we're assisting with today, finance, $150,000 sounds small, but it's probably a couple people. There's just not, we just don't have stuff in the department that we're able to cut. So that looks pretty dramatic, the expenditure only, and our recommendation is a hybrid approach, some of both. So some revenue raising, some expenditure reduction. Jim highlighted this really quickly, but I think it bears going over again. Basically taking the cuts that would be associated with public safety, funding those with revenue increases, and then balancing the remainder with about $750,000 in cuts across the remainder of the general fund organization. That's, again, in the grand scheme of $83 million, $750,000 doesn't sound like much, but it actually works out to about 5% cut on those remaining departments that are non-public safety in the general fund, which again, my sense is, certainly from finance, and you'll be able to ask the other departments going along, is likely to result in a reduction in force to do that. So that's the quick overview, and that provides the kind of foundation for your discussion over the next few weeks. Just a quick note about the budget document itself. Because we talk through the rest of the year about departments rather than funds, we've tried to organize the book in a way that will be comfortable for you. So it's organized by department, And we've tried for each department to give you a relatively consistent format. So you're gonna see a pie chart, you're gonna see a summary of the department itself, which is gonna include a breakdown of that department into functional areas. And so we'll talk a lot about, hopefully departments in their presentations will give you a lot of information, good information about what those functions are and what they do. And then you'll see detail behind each of those functions to give you a sense of where the money's gonna go in those departments from year to year. The larger departments, police department, public works, are more complicated, more detailed, and you'll see more detail in those than you will, for instance, in finance or legal, which are smaller budgets and more straightforward, cut across fewer funds. But hopefully you'll find that format to be consistent as you look through. Two items I'd point your attention to. One is that at your seat tonight, we had a supplement for you that's 3-hole punched and ready to go. One item is a detail of the general fund revenue projections that we use to build the budget. I'd ask you to tuck those into your book behind the revenue tab, which is, we've numbered them pages 15-1, 2, and 3. So you can tuck those right in behind page 15. And we also had a change. We had an issue with the planning department summary where the numbers didn't tie from the summary page to the detail. We basically replicated the planning department as a total, so you can pull the old pages out of your book and put the new one in and start from there. One other key section in this document I think that's pretty important. As part of our budget preparation, we asked departments to give a sense of what their cuts would look like. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Jeff, before we go along, I don't have a copy. Does everybody else have a copy? What he was just talking about?
Yeah. Do you need a set
Here's a set over here.
extra? Well, I don't know if it's extra, but it's Michelle's.
Okay.
Thank you.
We asked departments to paint us a picture of what they would cut functionally if they had to cut 5% out of their budget for 14 out of the recommendation. In page 138 in your budget book, and then over the subsequent few pages there, will give you a sense, department by department, of what those impacts might look like, again, at a functional level. So I would encourage you to kind of peruse that information, and I'm sure departments, as they make their presentation, will talk about those as well. So, Madam Chairman, with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions you might have in the kind of foundational presentation here, and certainly happy to stand by as other questions come up after the chiefs present tonight.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would just like to say, I appreciate the numbers in the budget book. It helps us immensely. Are there any questions or concerns for Mr. White? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have a couple of questions pertaining to the introductory material, that pages 1, 2, and 3, that I'd like to have you just elaborate on a bit. On page 3, and your comment, it states, the City Council approved a 2013 general fund budget that was significantly out of balance in the general fund, even after a shift of nearly 2 mills of property tax levy for that service fund. And I've had several people ask me about this. Why did you approve a budget that was out of balance? Last year, I think the council members here, we certainly didn't approve a budget that was out of balance. And I don't know if the material or the material we were using was not maybe as accurate as it should have been, but if you could speak to that, because I think the people are assuming that the council passed a budget that was $1.5 million out of balance, and I don't know if the other council members want to speak to that, but I don't think we took that action.
I can't speak to what you knew or didn't know or what was presented because I wasn't involved. All I can tell you is when I look at what was included in the budget, it showed basically a draw on general fund balance of $1.5 million for the current fiscal year. So I apologize. I wasn't part of that, and certainly I didn't. The language here doesn't mean to cast aspersions or to suggest that was an incorrect decision. There are a lot of reasons to adopt a budget that is where you're drawing on your reserves. In fact, one of the reasons to have reserves is to get through economic situations like we've had over the last half decade. That's the whole point in building a reserve, is not just to say, wow, we have reserves. It's to deploy those reserves when necessary to maintain city services. One of the things that choice that cities faced, every city and county faced in 2008, 2009, as the reality of the economic crisis really hit, was kind of two paths that they could follow to fix the budget. And one path that you saw a lot of communities, especially in the West, which had such dramatic declines in property valuations. You know, if your property valuations decline 20 or 30%, your sales taxes are declining 10 or 15% year over year, you're really faced with no other choice but to take pretty dramatic action to bring your expenses in line with your revenues. And so some folks did do that. They relatively immediately significantly cut city operations in order to make that budget balance. But Topeka never really grows very fast, and conversely, it doesn't really fall very fast either. There's a lot of folks who would love to have had the impacts from the economic crisis that Topeka experienced, because they were relatively moderate in the grand scheme of things. And I think the city's strategy, whether conscious or unconscious, was to do what it could to get through and hope things would get better. And that was a perfectly reasonable approach to things, was to try and keep the ship.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the point is, even if we were drawing down some reserves to make the budget meet, that doesn't mean we passed the budget that was out of balance. I think the action we took that night, however we were using whatever, shifting money around, in our minds, we passed the budget that balanced. Now, if there's information you found later that would state that perhaps it wasn't in balance, or maybe our figures were not correct, or some incorrect assumptions were made, that's very possible. But that night, we passed a budget that we were informed was in balance.
Sure. Well, fair enough. And again, I wasn't there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or concerns for Mr. White before we move on? Councilor Manspeaker.
Well, follow-up I would make to the mayor's comments is that I know last year on the budget night, I mean, we ran pretty late that night and we made some cuts that I think a lot of us didn't necessarily want to make. One instance that I can think of is the jail work crews. And I never implemented putting the jail work crews back to work from the council bench, but I know they're working in the city of Topeka right now, and that cost us something. So I can't remember what the number was, but it was 150,000 or something like that. I think it was over 100,000, if I remember right. And so I mean, that could be up to 10% of our money. Not to mention that we hadn't anticipated the wages that came in for the city manager. That adds to the number. I mean, there were a number of costs that were derived after the budget was passed. So, I mean, I agree with you. We passed a balanced budget. Now, how it got out of balance, that's the question that I think you're looking for the answer to.
City Manager.
Deputy Mayor, just to address those issues, in terms of the work crews, and we provided information on that, we took money out of the existing budget. We didn't just add an expenditure without offsetting that from existing money. So we went through the departments and we identified that, because when we did the cost benefit analysis of that, we would have spent a lot more money as opposed to using those work crews. Pertaining to the increase in the city manager's income based on the budget that was passed and some other expenditures, even in that case, we came back and we revisited and we fixed the budget. I think Jeff's, and I understand the sensitivity to it, when Jeff's talking about the significant balance, it was a dependence on one-time revenues, which are not sustainable. So his reference there is there were 2 mills that were taken out of the debt service fund that needed to be repaid back. And in addition to that, the budget plan was based on a deliberate and intended reduction of the general fund balance. So that's what he's talking about. He's not talking, it really just the expenditures and the revenues available to service those expenditures. So not looking to cast dispersions, but just to identify how we got to where we're at today. And what made it a little bit worse, a lot worse, was that revenues came in significantly below and some expenditures came up. But I want to be very careful. There were no decisions that were ever made pertaining to changes in the 2013 budget which weren't brought forward and also weren't addressed through finding additional revenue streams or existing revenue streams and a trade out at that point. So thank you.
Are there any other, Councilwoman?
A couple questions, if I could. In terms, I know it's in here someplace, but could you refresh, in terms of property tax estimates for next year, what assumptions were used for the 2014 proposal that we have in front of us? And if you've heard anything, kind of what you're thinking would happen in 2015?
So we assumed that there would be 3% growth in assessed valuation, so the value of a mill would be 3% more for the 14 budget than the gross amount we expected to generate in the 13 budget. And we recently got, well, late last week, Thursday I guess, got our preliminary valuation from the county, and it was right on top of our estimate, so that's good news. We also learned from the county, however, that the city's collections of property taxes in the current year have fallen significantly behind our historic average. The city, between current collections and delinquent collections, almost always collects 100% of what's levied. I mean, if you look back in history, anywhere between 98 and 100%. And we're running about 93% on current collections, and when you add delinquencies to it, about 94%. So we have, in the property tax estimates for the current year, even though a gross mill would generate $1,027,000, we have hedged how much we think we'll actually get to support budget operations down to about $970,000, which is more than we're getting, more than we expect to get in the current fiscal year. Does that help?
A little. It makes me a little nervous because I talked to someone just today about the counties having heard what whoever they ask thought might happen with the appraisals, and I thought the figure was 2.25. It was 2 point something. It was not 3.
We assumed that the gross levy would generate $1,027,800, and the actual preliminary estimate off the top of my head was $1,027,500. So close enough that we're not going to worry about that distinction. But with the haircut that we've given to our expectation of collection of each mill, we're comfortable that we're there. And that number can still change. You know, the county reserves the right to change that up to and including November 1 with protests and those kinds of things as well.
Understood, but one of the reasons we are where we are was apparently we overestimated some revenue before, so.
No, I was very surprised. I was very surprised to learn what we learned from the county this week related to collections this year. Because again, the city's collections have been very consistent over time. We've got a really nice schedule in the back of the comprehensive annual financial report, which the council will get in the next few days here, which shows the collection history over the last decade, and it's very, very consistent. So we were surprised, and hopefully we'll get a more pleasant surprise. Maybe there's been some record-keeping issues, or maybe some mortgage companies are delayed in paying. I don't really know what would cause that, but we've factored that kind of continued haircut into our projections for next year.
If I may. Sure. Regarding sales tax, as we look at revenue, if the city wanted to, the council was interested in assessing more sales tax, is that only possible if it's passed by the voters, or does the council have that capacity?
It has to be voted.
Okay. And third question, if I may. We have been talking for the last couple of years about trying to make sure that we were not just looking at our shoelaces, if you will, or at the immediate budget, but that we were looking 5 years out, and even 20, really, as we start to really move forward. I really appreciate the additional information here over last year, but I'm not seeing any long-range projections. Do you have even a short list of items? You've touched on a few that are going to affect the 2014 budget. Have you looked at what major kinds of changes, either increases or drop-offs in revenue or expenses, are pending for 2015, 2016?
So let me answer that two ways.
Okay.
I do think the idea of having multi-year forecasting is a great idea. It's a great idea. I think it's something the city has done kind of on and off through the past, but could do systematically better. I will tell you that, again, looking at budget requests from the departments that were based upon a status quo programs and services budget, the general fund grew about $4 million on the cost side. And again, we've talked about the challenges of revenue growth on the revenue side. So when you look at, I mean, most of the general fund is people. That's your biggest driver in the general fund, is people. And if you have average wage increases approved of 2% across the city's 7 bargaining units and its non-employee unions, you've got a pretty good sense of what your incremental increase is going to be from year to year. So if your revenues don't grow that fast, you're going to automatically be out of balance going into the next year. So the 5-year forecast is pretty predictable based upon what you think the growth in the cost of people are going to be going forward. We do know some positive things will occur in 2015 that we have contemplated in the 2014 budget. The big one is in the debt service fund, that debt service demands drop pretty significantly between 14 and 15. So even with the 2 mil shift and the 1.1 mil recommended increase in the mill levy there, that budget is actually still out of balance. We're still projecting to draw on fund balance there. The reason for that is that the subsequent year will snap back into balance just by virtue of the fact that the levy demands will decline because debt service is coming down. We don't really have any kind of aces in the hole in the general fund. We do know the payment to Shawnee County for Parks and Recreation, which is budgeted at just north of $2 million in this budget, will be cut by half in 2015, and then we'll go to 0 in 2016. So there's $1 million a year in reduced expenditures, required expenditures in the general fund. But beyond that, there's nothing material that I know of that's going to provide a huge natural reduction in cost to offset the natural increase in growth that comes from paying people more next year than we do this year.
Didn't our Lawson system pay off in 2015?
Yeah.
Unless
that's
you've
right.
got that spent already.
Yes, it's done in IT. That's in the IT budget, and they have basically contemplated that in their budget proposal for this year.
I see. Thank you.
We've been here 47 minutes and we haven't heard from the good chief, so we need to move on, if that's okay, Mr. White.
Absolutely.
All right. Chief, you're on deck.
Thank you.
Actually, you're up to bat.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to make this presentation as succinct as possible and walk you through the sections that are in the police budget. With me this evening at the table is Gretchen O'Donovan, is our accountant assigned to the police department, works with finance, came to us from finance. Many of you know Amanda.
What happened to my little girl? That was her name?
Amanda's who.
Yeah, where'd you go?
Yeah,
What'd
she
you
went
do
to
with her?
finance.
Okay.
Amanda went to finance, so Gretchen came to the police department.
All right, Gretchen.
So that's how we got here.
She's just been with me since 2005 and she
Right.
understands my questions, but Amanda's gonna do it.
Gretchen will do fine,
Gretchen,
we'll
I'm
get
sorry.
those answers if they can. If I might digress for just about 1 minute with regard to Councilman Manspeaker's question about weed mowing, I'll give you that long story really fast. What occurred, the history of weeds is a few years ago, we cut weed mowing out of the budget in the cost savings initiative. That didn't go over so well with the community, and the council put the weed mowing money back in the budget. At the same time, we had to remove from the budget the money for the inmate crews. So what we did in this year's budget was we used the money that you put back in for weed mowing and applied that to the inmate crews who mow weeds. And instead of using contractors, we leveraged the money into the budget to pay for the weed mowing, to pay for the inmate crews, our contribution to the inmate crew program, and put more inmate crews out doing work with the same money that the council authorized for weed mowing. So we don't use contractors, we use the inmate crews, and we leverage the money that was in the budget authorized by the council for that purpose, for that same purpose, so we didn't change a thing. And that's how you see inmate crews out mowing weeds. But what you don't see is contractors doing that. It's done by inmate crews. So that's how we got where you wanted to go by a slightly different path that still fit into what the budget authorized.
And then the inmates are able to pay their restitution and they're able to pay their child support. So it's a win-win for all of us, I think.
It was a great collaboration between the city and the county and the code enforcement and the police department, and the budgeting process and finance, and it got us right where we needed to go. Okay, 2014. The 2014 police department budget is approximately $37.62 million. There are 367 and a half employees in the police department, of which 300 are sworn officers, 65 and a half are full-time employees, or 65 are full-time employees, and there turns out to be 2.5 or 5 part-time employees who work in the PD. So what we have is 360 equivalent of FTEs of 367.5 people. We break that down into 4 budgets: the chief's office, the field operations budget, special operations budget, and the criminal investigations budget. So with us tonight, in addition to the chief's office, you have the field operations division, which is field operations is broken down into 2 commands: East Command and West Command. East and North Topeka are east, and everything else is west, is the West Command. Major Fox and Major Kramer are here with us tonight. It's the Special Operations Division. Major Haugen is here, and Criminal Investigations is the soon-to-be Major Jerry Stanley, who will be the Criminal Investigations Division Commander upon the retirement a couple of weeks back of Major Warren Wilson, who many of you know. He retired on June the 21st. So we have those, the senior command staff, as well as Gretchen and myself, and Deputy Chief Tony Kirk, who are in the room this evening. You have the summary sheets and the descriptions of the various functions. I believe that they're in the budget right behind the pie chart. Okay? So basically, there's a breakdown of those. I will not read that entire thing to you, but the Topeka Police Department's mission is established. If you can remember 4 words, I tell the recruit classes this all the time. If you can remember 4 words, you can remember the mission of the Topeka Police Department: crime reduction, safer neighborhoods. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So the budget's $37.62 million, and on those breakdown sheets, you can see what are wages, benefits, contractual, commodities, and capital outlay. The fund breakdown, you'll also see an additional funding source breakdown, and there are some revenues that we generate that I'm going to go through with you. But the chief's office has a full-time equivalent of FTEs of 27 people and a $4 million budget. The chief's office handles threat analysis, crime analysis, training, fiscal, public relations. The training academy is assigned to the chief's office, the legal advisor, professional standards staff, and you can see what all those. We manage the chief's office manages the accreditation process, and those things are listed under the chief's office on that. Field operations is East and West Command. These are basically the men and women that ride around in the black and white police vehicles and respond to calls for service. And so it has a $16 million budget. It is the largest single assigned budget in the police department because it has the greatest responsibility and most number of people. The next one is the Special Operations Division, has about 115 and a half employees assigned there. $11 million budget. This is all of the units that require specialized training and skills. There are a number of units that are assigned to the Special Operations Division that include vice and narcotics, the bicycle unit, motorcycles, K-9, all of the various units of the police department that work special operations on that side. And then we have the other side of that, which is records, property, evidence, impound, lot, and information technologies that is in the Special Operations Division. Criminal Investigations Division, 56 people, $6 million budget, handles all of the criminal investigations that, of the crime that occurs within the city of Topeka that are assigned to CID. Basically, there are 3 sections of CID. There's crimes against persons, crimes against property, and then the administration side of that, which includes the crime scene investigators, the crime victim assistance coordinator, the bomb squad, and the accident reconstruction investigators. So those are the basic 4 divisions of the police department. And the money that's assigned to each of those budgets for your review and perusal as you see fit. The summary sheets and the descriptions are there, very straightforward. The key cost drivers of the police budget is personnel costs. Over $31.7 million, or 84% of the police budget, is personnel expense. $5.6 million, or 15%, is the commodities and contractual, including vehicle lease purchase payments that we have as an example. It's included in there in December of 13, 14, and 15. And then there's a $300,000 capital outlay expense requested in the 14 budget for the additional purchase of additional vehicles following the direction that the council has established for us in the last year or so. Either we lease purchase or we outright purchase the vehicles. Now, we understand that the police department needs to participate in cost savings initiatives. We have, over $37 million of the general fund, and we recognize that we need to participate in cost initiatives. So we do produce revenue in the form of a number of things. We generate code enforcement, the impound lot, animal control, records, the sale of surplus property, impounded vehicles. We do sell police reports both online and at the window, and generate about $781,000 a year in revenue that goes back to the city. In addition to that, we generate a salary savings of approximately $600,000 due to participation in 19 separate grants or reimbursement partnerships, such as the SRO program that we have with USD 501. USD 501 pays the city of Topeka $366,000 a year for that SRO program, and that generates savings to the bottom line of the police budget because that money comes back in. We also participate in investigative task forces with the federal government and the Secret Service, the FBI, the DEA, a number of federal agencies in which we assign task force officers to those agencies. We pay their salary and benefits, but all of the ancillary expenses, it includes overtime, and travel, training, transportation, vehicle, communications, all kinds of stuff, is paid for by that federal agency. And that has been very successful in Topeka, and I also had some experience with that in my previous assignment, and it's exceedingly successful, and we've taken advantage of that here. In addition, we have received community policing grants, but the community policing grants are, we don't have those included in the 14 budget because they will have run out by 2014. But we are exploring more ways to expand savings initiatives because we know that we need to participate in this. Our large cost expenditures beyond personnel are mostly the purchase of vehicles. And we have an aging fleet. You're well aware of that problem. You authorized us last year to enter into a lease purchase agreement. You have seen some of those Explorers on the streets. There's some over in the garage being built, and those are a direct result of council authorizing that. So we need 25 to 30 cars a year. However is the best way to get that, or whatever we can do to afford to do that. Those are our large cost expenditures. Our budget preparation this year included Gretchen. Amanda helped us get Gretchen on the understanding the police budget a little better. She has a lot of experience in some other areas that have to do with other financial pieces rather than the police budget. We use the division commanders, working with the deputy chief and myself, to develop the budget for 2014. And in my opinion, we have only asked for what we think is needed, and we have only continued programs that you already set in place, the purchase replacement of vehicles, and maintaining or moving toward full staffing. We are currently, as we speak, 25 officers below authorized strength. You will recall that we came to the council and asked for over $380,000 to hire a class of people, and we did that. And those folks are in the final phases of their field training and will be released on their own probably in August. But since that time, we have suffered additional attrition, pretty much normal attrition, retirements, resignations, and people moving on, and we are currently 25 below authorized strength at this point. So when asked to develop a cost reduction program in the 2014 budget that the city manager challenged us to come up with, if you allow me to explain that, roughly 5% of the police department's budget at $37.6 million is about $1.9 million, roughly. There's no way to cut $1.9 million out of the budget when we're really operating on about a $5.8 million budget beyond personnel. So what we will have to do is to cut police officers to get to a $1.9 million reduction in the police budget. So you'll ask me, what does that look like? Well, the answer to that is, it looks like what it is right now today as we sit here, because we are currently 25 officers short. We intend to hire those 25 people. Actually, we're going to hire 24 and maintain the open deputy chief's position. The second deputy chief's position is open, so we intend to hire 24. Probably not all of them will make it through the academy, and guaranteed we will have more people leave us between now and the end of 2013. So we'll start into 2014 with some more salary savings that's available, because we won't be able to replace those folks right away. The salary of a police officer, I've always said over the years, it's about $50,000. Well, if you add in there, it's about $53,000 in Topeka. That doesn't necessarily mean a recruit officer, but across the board, it's about $53,000 in salary, and somewhere, give or take, 27% benefits on top of that, and then $6,200 for health insurance because of the health insurance requirements that we have across the city. That's about a $74,000 package. Times 25 people is about $1.9 million. So to achieve a $1.9 million savings, we'll have to lose from the payroll 25 police officers effective 1/1/14 to make that budget work. So currently at 25 below authorized strength, we are 14 field officers below where we should be. We are 4 community policing officers short. We have 4 community policing officer vacancies, which is probably why the majors, and maybe in this case some of you, get phone calls on, where's our community officer? We were at the neighborhood summit on Saturday, and I counted 9 buttons, stickers that got put on the initiative under public safety for our community officers being assigned longer to their assignments. But the reality is, we don't generally take them out of their assignment and move them. I recognize that neighborhoods get used to who the officer is and want to keep them there. So what happens is they move themselves. They choose another position, or they get promoted, or they get a specialty unit assignment. but it benefits us because literally the community trains up the officers on the community policing part of the community part of that. And so, but currently we're 4 below that, and there are 13 community policing officers, 12 assigned to the police territories, and the 13th one assigned to public housing. So we currently are 4 short there. We are 2 motorcycle officers short, 3 bicycle officers short, 1 canine officer short, and 1 person in CSI as the crime scene investigation function in CID. That's how we account for 25 shortages, the shortage, excuse me, of 25 officers. How would that materially change if we lost 25 officers? You look about like it does today. And that's creating obviously there are some effects to that. Overtime costs, in some cases, we're able to maintain the overtime costs because we have fewer people. So we budgeted overtime, but our overtime cost for those that we do have goes up. It reduces productivity. We have officers that have a hard time getting off when they want to use the accrued time that they have available for them and they can't. The effects of 25 people maintained from now on would have to be a reduction in core services in some fashion, and obviously then the issue of decreased morale. Because I would point out that 25 budgeted shortages wouldn't really be 25. It would be 25 plus however many people resign, retire, or move on through normal attrition. So it's easy for us to assume that if we lose a dozen people here, 25 is really 37. Currently, if you don't count the recruit class that's out in the FTO phase, we're 44 down, and the way that impacts the budget. So you have directed us to set that thing on the right path, and we've done that. But when asked to determine what this would look like, that's where a 5% reduction would come from. We're not asking for any increase in staffing for 14, only the direction of the council to get us to full staffing at 300. We are pretty close to full staffing on the civilian side, but you'll recall 3 years ago or so, we lost 12 clerical positions, civilian positions on the police department as part of the cost reduction initiative back in 09 when 127 people lost their jobs, 12 of those came out of the police department, and we carried 14 vacancies in the PD, which manifests itself to more like 25 or 26 over time when you have to maintain the vacancies, and then you have normal attrition, and that's how we end up being as short as we are. So the only enhancement requests that are in the budget for 14 are the need for vehicles. The lease purchase that we have is one thing. We need a second vehicle acquisition method, whether that's the direct outright purchase or whether that's another lease purchase. And then the other thing is a cooperative agreement between the municipal court and the PD on electronic ticketing. We went to e-ticketing. We discussed e-ticketing last year, and through necessary means at the 11th hour, we had to reduce and take out of the budget e-ticketing because we couldn't afford it. We have it back in the budget again. We're looking at some different ways that we might be able to fund that and save money. And the last point I'd offer would be the police video recording equipment. There's money in the budget, built in the budget for in-car video systems or police video. What we have been able to do is acquire the body-worn video that you see the officers that wear them on the temple of their glasses or on the side of their motorcycle helmet. We have 29 systems that are currently deployed. In reality, we need that mobile on-body video on every police officer in the field that's interacting with the public. Our experience has been that everybody's on their best behavior when the video camera is present and operating. And there are some studies out there that I have reviewed and researched that reflect that there's a 86% reduction in complaints and lawsuit payouts and claim payouts to cities who implement the systems. And they're about $2,400 a piece. That's about $1,200 for the unit and about $1,200 a year to maintain all the archival video that's archived. So that's about what they cost, which is half the cost of an in-car system and it works better. So between electronic ticketing, vehicle purchases, and video recording, there are no other enhancements to the budget other than normal cost increases. So that took me about 20 minutes. So if you have any questions, we will be happy to answer them. We have some specialists in the room that can help us if necessary.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions from the chief? Any questions? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. On the budget pages on 98, 99, is there a line item that reflects the electronic ticketing? And maybe that's for Jeff or you. Is that, you said it was in there?
It's in the enhancement package. We don't have the page numbers.
Oh, okay.
In the enhancement package, it's called Operational Funding Mill Levy Equipment and Fleet Replacement. That's the heading on the page. It's on the next page.
Gretchen, you want to
At the
come look at
bottom
my
of that
book?
page.
Yeah.
You want to come look at my book and point it out?
So I'm not sure we have any enhancement packages.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Maybe the enhancements didn't get into our book.
Oh, I don't think so.
In an equal proportion.
Jeff?
Madam Chairman, page 211,
211?
211 includes the page that Gretchen's referencing there.
Just on page 212?
211, 211.
Well, Gretchen saying,
Yep,
The
212, sorry,
electronic
yes, it
ticketing.
continues on the next page. That's
Yeah.
right.
that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have any more?
No, so actually, like then, maybe just for Jeff, then these enhancements are not in the budget document for this year, is that,
That's correct.
okay, thank you.
So I guess if we have any questions or concerns, we'll have to get all of you, Jeff, then? With questions like, that come up, once we're gone?
Yes, ma'am, anytime.
Okay. Denise?
Thank you. My question deals with, I guess, code compliance, which I know is under you. I'm not sure exactly, is that under contractual services? Is that budgeted there, or where do you have those listed as far as what the numbers would be that you have currently in code compliance?
Employees are listed under the Special Operations Division.
Okay,
And the 115.5 employees there, as part of that $11.3 million budget, includes the specialized units, but code enforcement is a part of that, commanded by the same community services lieutenant who coordinates the motorcycle unit and the SRO program. Code enforcement is all part of that.
So that's page 103.
I guess at one time I thought there was some anticipation, I don't know about the rest of the council, but that's one of the things I get more calls on than probably, unless it's streets or snow in the winter, but I think I've had 3 calls just this week on code compliance issues as far as cutting. You talked about the inmate crews, but I don't know if it's because there's not enough funds to keep up with it or what the real issue is. So I guess I would like somebody to sort of speak to that, because that is a #1 complaint that I hear among my neighborhood groups, or just calls that I get, that they've reported it, and then I'll get an answer back from somebody from code compliance through the right channels saying, oh yeah, we're already aware of that and it's in the pipeline to address, but at least I hear back from people saying it's never addressed. So I don't know whether it's a funding issue, it's a people issue. I'm just trying to figure out, what the problem is in code compliance, because it is a big issue for neighborhoods. And I think that, it certainly doesn't rank maybe up there with some of the other public safety concerns that you all deal with, but it is a neighborhood, I guess, concern.
But I'd answer that in two ways. One, from complaints that code enforcement gets that come from the council office, more than 90% of those complaints that come from the council office are already being addressed by the code enforcement unit staff. So they have a pretty good system of keeping track of those things, and the officers, the code enforcement officers that are out there doing that, their part. Part of the problem is nature. And what I mean by that is the weeds grow faster than we can cut them, and in some cases, if we don't get them cut right away, they're all of a sudden they're 6, 8, 10, 12 inches tall, and people are upset that it doesn't get cut, and so it doesn't get addressed fast enough. But most of the time, we already have either some form of a case or some form of a process being worked on a particular problem area. The third part of that problem is the legal system. There are a number of things that we as a city cannot do when it comes to private property. The police have a lot of authority on public property and very little authority on private property. That's the whole nature of the United States, so we don't have to get into that. But because of those requirements, there are letter requirements, first letter, second letter, 10-day waiting periods, 30-day waiting periods, appeals, fees not being collected, fees assessed, the right to go to a hearing officer. So all those legal processes grind exceedingly slow, but exceedingly fine. At the same time, the weeds are growing fast. When it's raining and it's 90, that stuff's growing faster than we're able to keep up with it. The other thing is, some years ago, we were going to make a discussion about increasing the number of code enforcement officers that worked in the city. Currently, I think there are 6. We were going to increase that to 12 and put one code enforcement officer assigned to every police territory, just like a community policing officer was. But that never got off the ground because of the increased cost and the budgetary problem and the economics that we were going through. You'll recall some years ago, the mayor at the time, Mayor Button, made a suggestion of doubling up the numbers of people in code enforcement. That never got off the ground because we couldn't afford it. So we're running that with 6 people and the supervisory staff, and to have abatement crews, and then leverage the money with the inmate teams to be able to cut those weeds. We stay on top of it, but we're not out in front of it. We're not out in front of it for a number of reasons. You're right, I think it is the single biggest complaint. I see more email exchange on code enforcement issues from the council office, city manager's office, the police department, special operations division, than any other single source of email I get besides junk email. It is coming out of code enforcement related issues that we have, and it's the nature of the beast.
Yes, you will.
And then as far as the mowing that does eventually happen, with the inmate crews, did I understand correctly then that there is no contractual services in mowing at this point in time other than with the inmate crews?
I don't, guys, correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct.
We're not using contractors. We leveraged all that money to the inmate crews. Our contribution to that is to pay the money toward the salary of the supervisors who run the team from the DOC, and then they leverage however many crews of people they have, and you got us more bang for the same dollar and got exactly where the council wanted to go by a different path.
But an issue, if we're not able to keep up, is still just whether or not we had an adequate dollar amount in there for whether it was inmate crews or contractual, but it was just how many dollars we had put in there and how many times we can get them out.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, and I would agree of the process, because I have a habitual gentleman on the corner, Patty can contest to this, and he knows how many days to get that letter, how many days it goes to court before he has to get out there and cut that grass, and it's already chest high. And me and Patty talk about it, so, I know that you guys are short-staffed, and I do want to commend the work that you guys do, because anytime a supervisor leaves her desk and she's out there writing, that's a do you have any in your budget, have you asked for any more code compliance officers, chief?
No, what I was asking about was the $1.9 million cut.
Okay, I hear that, but in this, but I know what you've been asked to do, chief. And because that's been a #1 complaint, or a complaint that we all agree on, if I was to say, how many code compliance officers could you use? I mean, I know you could use 1 or 2, but what realistically, what do you see?
In my opinion, a good place to start would be the same number of code compliance or code enforcement officers exist that are the same number of community policing officers that exist, which would be 12. Now.
Because you're saying we have 6 now, right?
Right.
Okay, now, and I'm gonna agree to disagree with you, because you know me and you can do that. And the reason why I say that is because this is a problem that I've always had sitting on this council. In West Topeka, and I'm the one that really started that cross-training where code compliance is concerned, because we'd have one guy go out and look at nuisance, and he'd come back and he'd make his report, then this guy had to go out on that same property and do the housing. I'm like, that makes no sense to me. I didn't understand how come they couldn't be cross-trained and that one person go out. But I feel on certain parts of the town, those people are able to have their lawns mowed, and you know what I'm saying? And so I don't understand why that person maybe twice a week can't come over and help on the east side or the sides that need it more, the low to moderate income side. I know Patty's done a great job, because I talk to her on a daily, well, not a daily, but we talk a lot. And I know she's done a great job on this area, and we're gonna go she pulls them all over to do a major sweep in different areas that are getting really bad. And I don't understand why we can't do that. We can't pull that person to do that, constantly do that.
I think we can.
So that's why I'm saying, I would not agree with the 12, but I would agree with.
How about this? How about if we put together a proposal for what we do with 2 more or 4 more?
Let's go 4.
We'll put together a proposal, because those are just my thoughts. The folks that do this every day, and not knowing that might be a question, might have a different deployment plan for 2 or 3 more people, how they would leverage those. I think they've done a pretty remarkable job of leveraging the assets that they have available, and find a way to leverage the weed mowing money into the inmate's salary contribution for the staff supervisors and make that work. They might have a better plan on how they would deploy 2 to 4 additional code enforcement personnel.
I would agree with you there, because when we're pulling Patty away from her desk, and I hear constituents saying she will not return my call, and I have to let them know that she's out writing, and she's actually out, because there's a process that we need to educate our constituents on, that I just can't call and say 2020 has high grass. They have to go out and they have to take pictures or do their thing with that. And then when they think that Patty is not at her desk and not returning calls, that's because she's trying to help get caught up. And I think that's great. Don't get me wrong. Don't take it like that. But they're concerned with, why don't we have that help? You know what I'm saying? But that's always been my main concern, and I want this council to know, because we all know that, there's one part of town that they could afford it, and there's another part of town that they need help, and however we do that.
We will put that together and submit that to the city manager for his review, and go from there.
Okay, I appreciate it. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, if I can add to that one other area, and that is at the neighborhood summit last Saturday, the code compliant issue was brought up by a number of the participants there. And in fact, it got some of the highest number of points as was mentioned. And out of that, I know there is interest in perhaps having a review of the code compliance issue. One aspect is, do we need more code enforcement people? Another is, are our ordinance correct? Are they appropriate? meaningful, that people don't repeat, and then the total administration of it, of our whole process. So I think this is going to be looked at in the ongoing point, and maybe get community input in that to see the whole picture, in addition to the possibility of code enforcement people. So I think I just wanted to add that point.
I appreciate that. Any other questions for the mayor? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Deputy
Start.
Mayor. I'm always trying to look at what others are doing our size, you know, whether it's other states or cities. Is there a place we can find out how many cities our size, how many are in the code compliance field operations? I mean, I'm assuming code compliance is in field operations, and there's a lot of other areas in there. How many's in the chief's office, how many's in special operations, and how many's in criminal investigations, like you've got it set out in the book. So that just for my sake as a new person, do we have more? Do we have less in the chief's office? Do we have more? Do we have less in special ops? And the same way with criminal investigations. How is Topeka comparing to other cities our size?
I can tell you that we compare up against 11 other cities our size for the 12 capital city comparison when it comes to crime stats and how much crime do we have and where do we have it and how is it applied? How do we apply the resources? But for example, I'll use one example. In the chief's office, we have the training academy assigned at the chief's office. A lot of police departments don't have their training academy assigned at the chief's office. I think it's more responsive to be assigned at the chief's office. I know of other departments that have them assigned that way, but I can also tell you many others do not. So you can find all kinds of different organizational charts in how we do these things and how we're trying to leverage these assets. But I can also tell you that when I came to Topeka 7 years ago, as the chief in Kansas City, the department was the same size, virtually the same size. Topeka was a little smaller, had about 20,000 less people, and had about 20 less officers. But the police department budget when I got here was $23, $24, $25 million. The police department budget in Kansas City was $40 million. And the populations were the same. And so what we have done, what has occurred in Topeka, is we have tried to adjust those resources over the past 7 years to be as responsive as we could to the needs of the community. And I think we've done a fairly good job of that, but I'm not the person who just makes that decision, that judgment. But so I'm just saying, there's a lot of different organizational charts out there, and they have more detectives than we have. But we have to be able to live within the resources that the council has set and the city manager has directed.
So the answer is really no, we can't compare ourselves to
We
other
can
cities our
compare,
size.
but you're gonna find as many that are similar as there are different. They're all different depending on the size of the department, what works for them.
What about classification of, you know, the title by professional title? Can you show what the cities our size have and, you know, how many detectives or how many by title? That would be something I would really, you know, down the road like to see, maybe not this year, but that we start comparing, you know, what our city size is and what the staff size is, because the majority of the city budget goes to staff. So,
We can do that.
Any other questions? Councilman Manspeaker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. One of the issues of concern for me, and I wasn't on the council when this happened, but when code enforcement was included in the police department, the struggle for me internally becomes, if you are hiring 2 more code enforcers, then that offsets in 2 more officers maybe not being on the street, or some other staff member not being on the street. And as much as code enforcement is an issue in my district as it is in everybody else's, and I hear the concerns of my constituents, I know public safety is of a higher concern to them. So it's really a struggle for me to say, bring us back a budget that shows us how we're gonna do code enforcement better, because I think you have a budget put together right now that says how do we police our community better. The problem is that it's not funded. And so when it's not funded, then everything sort of falls apart behind it. I wanna see us do everything we're doing better, but again, we've gotta pony up and pay the bill. So I commend you on the budget that you have. I think if you had more resources, we probably wouldn't have the complaints that we have.
Okay, I Are there any more questions, Karen?
This may be one that would require a little time for some specifics, but when the council passed the budget last year that would be one that would allow 300 uniformed officers, the discussion was that we were going to return to full strength. And you just gave us a figure of a $23 to $25 million budget 7 years ago when you came. And today, we're talking about a $37.5 million budget. Could you address a little bit, I mean, that's a 50% increase in the budget with the same size department.
I'd have to go back and look at the 06, 07 budget to see what that number was. It runs in mind, that's about what it was, but that number may be off.
Okay.
We spent $23 million for salary, personnel costs. The rest of it is other things. But one of the things that occurred is, if you go back and look at the budget, last year's increase from 12 into 13, there was a significant increase in the police department budget, several $1 million.
Yes.
Because the budget wasn't fiscally budgeted properly. It just wasn't. And I think the city manager found that out about the first 2 nanoseconds that he was here, when he got here, and decided that, how is this budgeted properly? Because the budget worked, but the budget worked by shifting funds and resources and keeping vacant positions open and not filling them, and rolling that money forward and using the fund balance and a number of things that were done. And we had to put more money into the Capers pension system for KP&L and Capers. We had to put more money into work comp. We had to put more money into the health insurance fund. There were things that were under budgeted that had to be budgeted. So my point is, you see an increase in the budget, but you don't see an increase in the people. So the budget was more correctly budgeted in 13 and 14 than it had previously been, and that was what created part of the problem. So budget increased, but the people didn't.
Yeah, that was about 6.
That's 6 point something million in 1 year in a jump, which takes that 37 million back down to more like 30 to 31 million. So then you go back 5 years. Now that decrease is not so great when we jump 6 million in a year.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Chief.
Councilman Campos?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I want to first commend you for the work that you've done. It's obvious to me that you have kept your numbers low over the last few years, but yet you've kind of supplemented that with the strategy you put forth in fighting crime. And that's pretty obvious in the numbers that you provide us on a quarterly basis. One of my major concerns is that you said that you are not at full force, but yet you have 4 community officers currently that are not filled, correct?
Correct.
Why wouldn't that be one of your primary positions to have filled?
You had just broached the topic of what are we going to fill first? The men and women who make the 911 calls in the black and whites? Or are we going to fill the community policing officer positions first and strip field patrol to put the officers in the community policing unit? Granted, they are both in the same division. They're all assigned to field operations.
Right.
But the community policing officers don't necessarily take 911 calls. They are more proactive in their approach. The strategy should be that the community policing officers are filled.
Right.
But the incumbent part of that is when you're 14, 15, 16 short in field patrol, it's hard to fill those specialty unit functions when your field patrol is low. We have to keep the field patrol staffed at an optimum level, well, not an optimum level, a minimal level, because if we don't, my internal challenge to them, this is not a mandate from the city or the contractor or anywhere else, is to keep all 12 territories filled 24/7, 365, and I really don't care how you do it. Whether we have to do it in holdover, call in early, overtime, we need to keep those territory cars filled because those are the men and women that make the 911 calls and handle the calls and the accidents and the things that happen. We sometimes have to go short in motorcycles and bicycles and narcotics and community policing officer functions, only because of a shortage of personnel. If our field patrol, we can run a little short in field patrol, but 25 short is approaching 10% of the police department, and that's a critical number.
If I may, Deputy Mayor. What percentage of your current force administrative that are not on the beat?
Well, it depends on, that are not on the beat. There are less than 100 people assigned to the beat. The officers and the supervisors, I think that number's, what's that number? Field ops, Chris?
It's 81, they've not counted 19 recruits.
It's 81 officers, but then you add in the corporals and the lieutenant sergeants on top of that. So it's 81 officers at the current staffing, plus the corporals and the sergeants and the lieutenants that are assigned out there on the ship. So part of it has to do with the answer. We have a lieutenant who's a watch commander, who's in charge of the whole city on the ship. That guy's on the beat, but that guy's not responding to call for 911 calls for service. Less than 10% of the police department is command staff. 56 out of 300 officers are detectives. So how many are on the beat? 100 roughly out of the 280 that are on the police department. Then you have to add in the motorcycle unit. You count that as a beat officer. The bicycle unit guys, are those counted as people on the beat in the neighborhood? We'll put the bicycle unit in East Topeka, and they'll work in Topeka. So are those counted as beat officers? They're not necessarily responding to calls for service, but they're out there on the streets. So there's a lot of officers assigned to the street that aren't beat officers responding to calls for service. So it's a difference in what their function is. The violent crime unit is out there every night. I guarantee you they're out there every night. The deputy mayor knows where they're at and sees them.
Amen to that.
But would you classify those as beat officers or officers on the beat? I would, because they're out there fighting crime and or evil every night.
If they're on the street, I consider them beat. If they're behind a desk, I consider that not to be on the beat.
Then the detectives are assigned to the desks and work field follow-up, and the command staff guys and gals are assigned to mostly administrative duties. So that's roughly 22 and 56, 70, 75 people out of 300 are not. All the rest of them are assigned to the beat.
56 detectives, do we need that for a population of 130,000?
Yeah, we ought to have more than that. You're right, that's pretty low.
Really? Okay. That's it, Deputy Mayor.
You through, John?
Yes.
Okay, Councilman Manspeaker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's been a while since I've gotten into a law enforcement car and rode around, so tell me where we're at today. How many calls do we run behind typically on an evening?
How many times are we, I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to speculate, but I would say that we are holding calls on the afternoon shift virtually every day. Holding calls meaning we have more calls in the queue and we have officers to respond to them. So they're stacking up, call stacking, they're stacking up. Everybody's on a call and the calls are stacking up probably on the second shift and the early part of the third shift every day.
Okay. I remember one night that I rode along on a Friday evening, I think it was something like 25 were sitting there waiting at any given point through the night. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't being responded to. Also, another, for instance, in terms of administration, I had a coworker who got into an automobile accident. So we're dealing with the car being fixed, and he's asking me, how quick can I expect the report, so on and so forth. So I called down to the records to see, when the report would be done so we could come pick it up. And I think it was 7, 8 days after the fact. And the issue wasn't, the issue was that there was only one staff person logging those reports in or scanning them in so that they're available for people to come pick up. So the thought process in my mind, well, why don't we have somebody else doing that so that the person who's involved in the motor vehicle accident's not put out the money that they've got to pay for a rental car or whatever else when everything hinges on that report, between the insurance companies. So I'm thinking about that. That's another cost. I mean, that's another, we've got to spend money to be able to do something like that. But last night, at 11:45, when I walked out on my porch and watched two people run away from a car, which I thought was a suspected car break-in, and called 911, and 2 officers showed up 5 minutes after I made that phone call, which I was very surprised and very encouraged that they were there at fast, but thought, man, this is just a car break-in. Well, come to find out that my neighbor was held up at gunpoint for his wallet. And I really want that to happen. I want people to show up 5 minutes after that event. I want it to happen fast. I can wait 7 days to get the accident report. I can wait to get the lawns mowed. But the reality is we've got to be able to respond to those emergency situations very, very quickly, because it's a matter of life and death.
If I may, very quickly, the accident reports are being reviewed by people who are making sure the accident reports are correct and all the right stuff is being into the accident report. So there's a review of the reports, and that takes a little extra time, and all those reports are being reviewed. And the second thing is call prioritization. That's why we have call stacking and prioritize the calls. So the car break-in is one priority, a robbery to an individual is a different priority, and that robbery to the individual is gonna go to the top of the queue, and all the other stuff that's queued up is gonna be delayed, or in some cases, a long time response. In some cases, we never got there.
Exactly.
Because there was nobody to send, and by the time we were ready to send somebody, it was hours later and people didn't really care. But that's what lets us have 2 officers to be able to respond to that robbery in 5 minutes or less, or an in-progress call, because we do call stack those things and have the people in the field to be able to respond to them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and I know we've kind of elaborated this longer than we probably should have, but it's very good educating you guys, and to the new staff, if you want to get with Chief Miller, I'm sure he can take you over and show you the call communication center and how it works. And I tell you what, I challenge you to go do that, because I did that through the fire academy, and it was an eye-opener that you have this one person with so many screens, and she knows where this officer's at, or she's pulling people and stuff, and it gives you a better understanding of what you're talking about and a better understanding of what we're faced against.
If I might, remember the communications center is also run by our partners in the county.
Right.
Communications center is staffed and maintained and operated in the budget of the sheriff. And recall also that we're not having to discuss anything in the budget this year about the purchase of radio equipment that is millions of dollars, because the county picked up that purchase of that whole new radio system that's being built and installed as we speak. There have been previous budget years when we were sitting here looking at where we were gonna find $2 million or more for police radios, but we found alternative ways to do that, and the county picked that expense up.
Yeah, but I appreciate that, Chief, but I just think it's very important for, Mr. Campos and some of the new people to go through and look at that so they get a better understanding. It's one thing to see it and another thing to say it, so. Okay, is there any other questions for the Chief, Karen?
Not so much for the chief, but across the table, I feel us winding up to the city manager and
Okay,
Jeff.
Well, before I want to let the chief go, is there any other questions for him? Comments, concerns? No? Okay, Karen?
If council members have questions about budget or about programmatic questions for the police department or any others as we go through, how do you want us to handle those, please?
Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Hiller, please direct those directly to Mr. White and his staff. He will either address them himself or he'll divvy those up to the appropriate people. If you feel it's necessary to reach out to me, certainly do so, and I'll do the same thing.
Thank you.
And to piggyback off of that, Mr. White, if you can, whatever request is made, if you can send that to all the council members, that way we won't have that same question.
Absolutely.
And if staff can get what we've asked for staff to get to you and you to get to us, is that how you want that done? Just, or get it to Jenny and Jenny can get it to us? I don't care, but just so that we all get it.
Absolutely, and we'll try and bundle things together so we're not overloading your email inbox as well.
Not a problem, no problem. It's budget time, we understand that. Okay, thank you, Chief. And welcome, Gretchen, right? All right, thank you. All right. White, City Manager.
Deputy Mayor, I'd like to ask Fire Chief Greg Bailey and his staff, are you on your own?
Okay, before we do that, can we take a 5-minute break?
Fine, that's
5-minute break.
That's good, thank you.
Thank you. City Manager?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At this time, we'll hear from Fire Chief Greg Bailey.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, Madam Chair, Mayor Wolgast, City Council members, City Manager. Obviously, we all know I'm Greg Bailey, Fire Chief for the City of Topeka. The rest of my executive staff, two on the pre-bill with the approval that you gave us last week for two apparatus. They went on a pre-bill. I think if you recall, when we talked about it last year at the CIP, we talked about potentially realizing about up to a $50,000 savings by rearranging our vehicle replacement plan schedule. We have been able to realize close to almost $100,000, which is a good deal, good news. And we also believe that we could, in the past, we realized a little bit more savings when we went to pre-bill. So we don't want to make any promises, but we wanted to at least stay consistent with our efforts to try to realize all the savings that we did. That took two of my executive staff away, and I had one more still here in town, and we had an emergency within our in our front office this evening. My executive assistant was called to the hospital for something that I'm not fully sure, but I asked him to accompany her, and I told myself amongst friends here, so I came alone. Yeah, he's the union president, so I know he's got my back. Yeah. But on a more serious note, I'm here to present the 2014 proposed budget for our City of Topeka Fire Department, and our proposed budget is approximately $25.8 million. Our Topeka Fire Department exists for the purpose of enhancing public safety and improving overall quality of life for our Topeka community. Fire and life safety is our expertise, or fire and life safety mitigation is our expertise. Our mission is to save lives and protect property. It's pretty simple. We like to do things and keep them as simple as we possibly can. The new council members, Councilman Campos, Councilman Schmidt, Councilwoman Schwartz, and Councilwoman De La Isla. We've all visited within the recent month as we reached out to them to try to make them a little bit more familiar with the Topeka Fire Department. So I will apologize to you for some of the redundancy that you'll get back tonight. But as we prepared, we operated under the assumption that if nobody knew anything about us, what we would want them to know. Of the 245.5 personnel which make up our department, and we get a 0.5 because we have a part-time person. 216 are firefighters, and those firefighters are captains, lieutenants, apparatus operators, or drivers, and firefighters. And they do the things that most people think of when they think about firefighting, as well as they provide basic emergency medical service responses. We have 9 middle management level personnel. They're realized in the positions of shift commanders and battalion chiefs. And these personnel are management people. They work management personnel who work a 24-hour shift. They're typically our more senior people, and they possess the combination of knowledge, experience, both on the fire grounds and in the fire stations, in and around the fire houses, and the leaderships necessary to manage our day-to-day responsibilities and the needs of our fire suppression crews. Our department has 3 training officers. They're 24-hour training officers. And they also play a role as our safety officer on every fire emergency incident that we respond to. They provide training opportunities for the public, i.e. CPR training or CPR friends and family training at times, and then they provide the EMS training primarily for our firefighters. We have 3 fire investigators, all of which are law enforcement certified, which is necessary as they prepare cases, and they help us to determine cause and origin of fire incidents that go on in our community. We have 4 inspectors that inspect places of assemblies, issue permits for fireworks, residential open burnings, tank removals, occupancy loads, boarding care homes, our schools, you name it, they inspect. We have 1 public education officer, Officer Banks. He primarily provides the fire and life safety education for pre-K through seniors, and primarily for outside of our department. He does our external training for our citizens. We have 1 information technology officer. He provides the computer-aided dispatch run cards, which basically lets us know which companies run, or let dispatch knows which companies are to run which calls. And if those companies are out, what are the backup or contingencies for calls. He also maintains our computers for us to do our daily operations as well. We have 4.5 civilian positions, and of those 4.5 positions, that makes up our teams, and we operate as a team. I can't reiterate that enough. Our executive assistant, our business service division, and our city's emergency management coordinator are all made up of those 4.5 civilian positions. And lastly, we have 4 members of our executive team, which is represent our deputy chief of operations, our fire marshal, our division chief of training, and myself. And we again, operating as a team, we are cross-trained experts. We use one of our civilian positions to assist us in our executive management team. We operate 12 companies, 12 pumper companies, or engine companies, 2 aerial apparatus, and 4 truck companies, and we operate currently out of 12 stations, which are strategically located throughout our city. And as we all know, we have Station 13 online, and it's scheduled right now to be completed at late summer of 2014. In 2012, we responded to 18,449 incidents, approximately 75% of which were emergency medical calls. Again, 75%, approximately a little over 13.8 were emergency medical calls. Our key cost drivers, probably, if you haven't already figured it out, 66% of our budget is payroll. We do not generate revenue, although, we have traditionally believed that fire and life safety mitigation is priceless. Yet we realize that we have a role as members of the team, City of Topeka, to try to keep revenue down, keep expenses down low. So we are thinking of a little bit outside of the box, and this is the first time some of you may have heard this, but one of the ways that we're thinking about generating revenue is what we call motivational savings. And for us, motivational savings is a way that we, the Topeka Fire Department, can generate savings from our existing approved budget and keep those savings within our department. It's a little bit different, but we think it can serve a great purpose. Motivation for our firefighters, motivation for our administration, to challenge ourselves to how can we save if we, and I think realizing that anything that we can save, much like we do in our individual homes, if whatever we can save, we get to keep and use for something else, we think is thinking outside of the box. So don't have any specifics, don't have an exact example of how it might work, and hopefully it doesn't sound crazy. We've talked about it a lot, tossed it around a lot, but right now, any revenue that comes in to the fire department, i.e. we go down to a training like in Crisis City or somewhere, and the state fire marshal's office may seek to reimburse us, but it goes back to the general fund. All monies that come in to us go to the general fund. Of course, we look at things like maybe charging for burn permits, but we think that would be such a nominal amount, because the people who are typically applying for permits are applying because they can't really afford to haul off to the dumps, and so we don't think we realize a lot of money go that way, but just a thought. Our large costs or large expenses typically are major apparatus repairs. Although it's infrequent, it does happen, and so that's typically where we realize our larger expenses. The way we came up with our 2014 budget preparation is we met as an executive staff, and we looked at 2013 as a basis, and we kind of just built from there. So If you look on page, I think 46 in your books, you'll see our Topeka Fire Department budget, and it starts off with the pie chart, I believe. And the chart, as I shared before, it shows a breakdown. For people like myself, I like pictures, and the picture shows that 66% is wages, the 22% benefits, 9% contractual, and then 3% is commodities. The capital outlay is the 3-year project, the renovation project that was approved last year. Of course, 2014, it started in 2013 to be 2014 to 2015 of the approximate 141,000 for the renovation project to the fire administration building. We broke our budget down into 4 areas. Administration, and why it says 5.5, because as we prepared the budget, we counted one of our civilian positions as one of our members of our executive team, because that's how we actually use it, the 5.5. Administration, obviously, is the essential key component to the success of our organization. Customer service being our priority, we use our business service operations, training, and fire prevention divisions to help us in our administration. Again, those are the players, or the individuals who make up our executive team. Our training division, that budget is $683,000. It provides the training for our personnel. Not only do we do the professional certifications and skill-based trainings for our firefighters, which we have to keep them trained. As an administration, our primary role, one of our primary responsibilities, is to ensure that our firefighters return home to their families at the end of each shift. And we take that responsibility seriously. And I think that goes with it without any further discussion. Fire prevention, a little over 1.2 million. Again, all of our expenses come out of the general fund. You see operations, the bulk, which is 216 people, is 23.2 million. I don't want to read, I don't need to read to you the information that's right before you. I know you can do that. Basically, I wanted to be prepared to answer the questions. We were tasked with the same exercise as the rest of the department directors to share what would happen if we had to realize a 5% cut in our budget. 5% cut in our fire department budget up to $25.8 million is roughly $1.3 million. And again, with the bulk of that being in personnel, that's where we would realize the cuts. To realize the 1.3, we would have to cut approximately 21 firefighting positions for 2 companies. The impact of that, well, I think it's pretty obvious. It would be a negative impact on morale, which is something that is extremely important in our profession. You heard morale, and sometimes it sounds like just formality, or it kind of falls on words. But in the fire department in particular, morale is I would rank it right up there at the top of one of the most important things that we have to maintain. Once you start dividing or breaking morale in the fire department, you start dividing your community. You start dividing your department, and you start dividing your community for a number of reasons. So it lowers the level of fire and life safety resources on our streets and within our neighborhoods that we need to make available to respond to emergencies. Again, I would reemphasize something that a lot of people still don't know, and that is that 75% of our calls are EMS calls. So when that life-threatening emergency exists, as you alluded to, Councilman Manspeaker, if your neighbor was not only held up, but if your neighbor was harmed in a way, more than likely when that 911 call is activated, you're going to get a Topeka Fire Department unit on scene prior to the private ambulance company. And no disrespect to the private ambulance company, because we work with them as well. A number of our people are, of the 216, approximately 14 are paramedics. And I bring that up because that's a direction that we're trying to go in the future with our department, is we're trying to see and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but we're trying to see what's the best use of our resources that we have. If we are first on scene, right now, we work at as all of our people are EMTs or emergency medical technicians, so we train at a basic level. But what we'd like to do is start looking at what direction should we go in the future, i.e. advanced life support or advanced life support. And we don't have anything put into our budget. I mention it though because when we initially prepared the budget, we did prepare enhancements, but realizing that we need to be a part of the team and make cuts, we're not prepared to present any enhancements tonight. I think that everyone around the table is aware of the primary direction that we're going as a department, and we want to make sure we do our part to work as a team. You heard again, not only the team Topeka Fire Department, but the team City Council, the team Topeka Community, and certainly share in our role in contributing to helping us get beyond 2013 and 2014 to what we think would be a much brighter future for the city of Topeka. Might sound a little soapboxish, or might sound a little different than what you expect hearing out of the fire chief, but again, we like to keep things simple. We really like to keep things simple, and so with that, I will yield to any questions that you might have.
I'll start out. Chief,
Okay.
on page 50, I don't know if you have a,
I don't have a page, but I
okay,
can probably.
well, I don't know who this would go to. It's got education and travel,
Yes.
and that was budgeted at 20,000 in 2013,
Mhm.
and in 2014, that's budgeted at 70,000.
Yes, that is a contractual obligation that we have. It's a wellness and fitness initiative that we have, and that's where it was budgeted. That's the area that it was budgeted.
Now, what do you mean?
So it's a 3 years, over the 3-year period of the contract, that was, we
Oh.
have, we have a $100,000 commitment, and so we broke it up into thirds for budgetary purposes.
So the city pays for that?
Yes,
Okay, because that says education and travel,
yes,
that's what it's under?
yes.
Okay. Why is it under education and travel, Jeff? If it's a wellness, isn't it a fitness like Maximus or?
Well, no, it's not necessarily the physical, but it is an overall wellness, health, and fitness that we have. And when we prepared our budget, we thought that we were gonna have to ask for that as an enhancement. And when we learned that because it was agreed to in the contract, it becomes a contractual obligation. And so
Okay.
that's where it was inserted
Okay.
back into the budget.
Okay,
If it needs to be moved to a different area, I would defer to Mr. White to
well, I just want to understand what it is, okay?
Okay.
And then also, I see last year we didn't have a reimbursement for cell phones, but this year we have reimbursement at 1,800.
more people, are trying to not use a city-issued cell phone, they're using their personal phones, and with that, there comes the reimbursement.
That's reimbursement back?
It's reimbursement back to an individual. And again, it's a way to try to realize efficiencies. You know, when we came in, as an administration, last year, you know, one of the things that we knew that we would have to do was, we'd have to make a lot of decisions, whether it's, do you restructure your, vehicle replacement plan, or do you allow companies to go out for the 4th of July and do a request for apparatus, or whatever it is. And so before we ever had to make our first decision, we sat down as an administrative team and we developed a template. And that template is to help us, designed to help us make decisions. And of that template, we have 4 variables. One is safety. I think it's a no-brainer why the fire department would want to have safety as a variable. The second is cost. We realize that we have fiduciary responsibility to manage the taxpayer dollars. Quality is another. In the fire service, when you think about, okay, we're managing costs, so does that mean the lowest bid? Absolutely not. When we're talking about putting firefighters in hazardous situations and the equipment and the apparatus and and how we may have to get things. Quality is something that we have to look at. And the last variable is efficiency. And so we're always trying to look at efficiencies, as I alluded to when I first started talking about why a couple of my staff are not here. We're trying to maximize our efficiencies. So when we look at that, cell phones were one of the things that we thought, not only is it inconvenient to have your personal cell phone in one pocket, another cell phone, but we could itemize our bills and realize some efficiencies by having those people carry their own personal phone and then get reimbursed for calls that may be city-related or work-related.
Okay. I guess I was just kind of wondering because, they have radios, that they use all the time. So I guess there was probably a point in time when they needed that,
But think about the time that when we probably most need our radios is during an incident and everybody's needing the radios. So not all of our firefighters have cell phones. This is pretty much our
is this just for
staff.
administrative?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, none of our firefighters, to my knowledge, will get reimbursed for cell phones.
Well, no, that number would be bigger.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just something new on there. It's like, whoa, what the heck? Okay. Any other questions for Chief Bailey? Karen?
Couple of them. I noticed on your utilities that you've got both gas and electric going up.
Yeah.
Thought that we were spending, doing some capital outlay, for instance, on the fire department administrative building. And we also have, to conserve electricity or conserve utilities and make it more functional. We also had an overall, I need to look back through these other budgets, but an overall plan to conserve utilities. So I'm curious why it's going up.
Utilities would be contractual, I believe.
It's under utility, it's
Yeah.
right under contractual.
And our contractual obligation in 2014 is actually 119.9 lower than it is in 2013. It's mainly from a reduction in IT fleet and facility charges. So while I understand what you're asking, that you would think you'd see a lower cost on utilities. Overall, our contractual obligations in 2014 is 2.2 million, a little over 2.2 million, which again is about 119.9 lower than what it would be in 2013. Utilities saw an increase of about 3.9%, and I think that largest increase came from electricity, and that number was reported to us by finance.
I was going to say, Madam Chairman, we might answer that next time globally to give
Okay.
you, because the chief's absolutely right. That information is a plug in his budget that he doesn't control. My
Okay.
speculation is it's rate increases approved by the KCC, but let us circle back with you on that.
Okay, and under maintenance and fleet charges, and again, maybe that came from you, Jeff, but one of the things that we talked about in terms of going ahead and spending the money to buy new fire engines was so that the fleet costs went down. And I see a pop in 2013 to $334,000 and a drop to 2014, yet in 2012 it was $166,000. So is that bookkeeping or?
Yeah, some of that's probably reporting, and I guess I'd offer the same thing there. This is
Okay.
another item that at least in the short run, the chief doesn't have any control over because those costs are built into your budget. My guess is there's a lag that's a backward-looking figure rather than a forward-looking figure, so the efficiencies would be picked up going forward. But we'll answer that question comprehensively for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You done? Anybody else? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Deborah. Do you have any vacancies, or how many typically vacancies do you run? Any open positions to be filled, or you go through through your training program, you have people coming online?
We have minimum staffing requirements, which, well, to answer your question, no, we do not have any vacancies. Yet we do. We have 2 recent retirements, but we have already been given approval to fill those positions, so we're in the process of actually filling them. So we are up to, I think for the intent of what your question is, we are.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councilman Smith?
Chief, when I was over there the other day, you talked to me about the ISO rating and the improvement from 3.9 to 2.9, and the impact that had on insurance rates for people in the city. Can you say, does this budget that you're presenting, is that going to have any impact on being able to maintain that rating with the ISO?
Well, Councilman Schmidt, for those who may not know, the ISO, the Insurance Service Organization's ratings impacts our city. It has the potential to realize reduced premiums for businesses, and as we learned during our last audit, for individual or single-family dwellings as well. We in the city of Topeka were a 3/9. The numerical rating system is the lower the number, the better, and the higher the number, obviously, the more challenging. The /9 is, I believe, based on the distances away from a water source, like water hydrants, et cetera. The 3 was we were able to improve to a 2, and I use we loosely. It involved our fire department, our dispatch, and the city's water department. And to answer your question though, Councilman, this budget does not necessarily show anything that will help us to improve that rating.
But
not impaired with
but there aren't any cuts that would cause us to slip back to a 3.
Well, the challenges could be there with cuts. The challenges, i.e., such as less training. If we don't have the training, the record keeping that was essential and played a vital role in helping us to realize an improved number. Those are huge components and not to be taken lightly.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Councilman Manspeaker?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Do we charge a franchise fee to the private ambulance service here in town?
No, we do charge, I believe it's $25. I think it's a nominal fee. Isn't that what it is? A little.
Not sure.
I don't know if it's called a franchise fee, but let me get that answer and get back to you. I know there is a fee. It is nominal. It is, like I said, I think about $25 or somewhere under $100 that they pay. And I think we just did a 1 year. Remember the 1 year fee that we just did? I don't know what it's called. I think it's the franchise fee, I believe. I'll feel more comfortable getting that answer and getting it back to you,
Okay.
Councilman.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Karen?
I was gonna actually ask the chief to chat a little bit about that issue in terms of, it comes up from time to time, the duplication of the privately contracted EMS service and the firefighters going out. Could you talk about whether there's actually redundancy in public funds and what kind of conversations people have had about maybe the fire department taking it over or things like that?
Well, when I hear about the fire department taking over the ambulance service, that comes up a lot. And Councilwoman Hiller, congratulations. That's the first time somebody's got me to actually say that, because I typically would cringe. Although I cringe because I think about what it costs to start up an ambulance company. I cringe because when I talk about morale and relationships are critical. When we work and we're so reliant on our private ambulance company to work together and support one another as first responders, sometimes they afford us the training, they afford us the replacement of the equipment and tools that we use. Certainly when they hear discussions or talk or the fire chief using that type of language, it will cause them concern, and I can respect that. But honestly, I think and I believe with 29 years of experience as a firefighter and being an emergency medical technician, that if we were moving along that lines, which I would caution we would need to do so very carefully, I think we could provide a better service. But again, that's getting the cart before the horse, maybe to talk about taking it over. You heard me allude to moving toward ALS, more advanced service. We asked last year, I think for those of you who were on the council last year, you know we asked for emergency medical officer, you know, and that was one of the things that, you know, we had in our enhancement package this year. And I pondered all the way up until just sitting over there as to whether or not I would ask for any enhancements or not. And again, you know, we're just keeping it simple. We're just keeping it real, as the kids say sometimes. As doing our part of trying to be team players and stay within the budget. We're not coming in and asking for enhancements. We're trying to operate within our existing our proposed budget, and we're going to try to make things work. But that being said, we still believe that we should, for example, of the 216 people that we have as emergency medical technicians, 14 of them are paramedics. Some of those paramedics do work for that ambulance company on their days off. I would contend that they're some of the best that we have in the city. Yet, as Topeka firefighters, when they arrive on scene, having this skill set, having this knowledge, they are not allowed to practice to the scope of their training, because the Topeka Fire Department, we're only approved to practice as emergency medical technicians. So we're in the process of trying to transition. We have contracted with a doctor to help us develop protocols and procedures to move in a direction to where we can expand on a skill set that we already have and a service that we're provided 75% of our calls on.
Thank you, because I appreciate that might not be something for this year, but in that longer term vision that I think we need to touch on, at least.
I would not
I appreciate the
disagree.
overview.
Any other questions or concerns? Any other questions or concerns? Okay, well, Chief Bailey, I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
City Manager?
Deputy Mayor, thank you. That concludes our presentations for this evening. And the next meeting that we would have scheduled would be on July 13th, and that will be on a Saturday from 9 a.m. till noon. And at that time, we will hear from the Public Works Department, Planning, H&D, and Zoo. And then,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor. At that point, there were a couple of issues that were brought up. We will get everything to you before then, but we'll just summarize that at the beginning of that meeting also.
Okay, that would be fine. And again, if you have any questions or concerns, or give them to Jim, Mr. White, or give them to the city manager, and we'll get the answers that we need. Is that it? Yes.
Could I make a comment, Deputy Mayor?
Absolutely.
I think in spite of my initial question, I like the presentation of the budget, the fact that it is a difficult budget, and we have no incentives in it. And I think maybe we should clarify to the council that there on page 2, starting on 211, are the incentives or the other possibilities that, like the police chief mentioned, like the fleet replacement, the video recording systems. So those things are not in the budget, but if we feel they should be included by the end of the budgeting process, then we can move to include them. And a lot of those are the other repairs to buildings, things that some are emergencies perhaps that we do need to consider. So at some point, we need to go over those so that we're aware of these are possibilities if we feel they should be included. But I think that the way this is structured is different from the past, but I think it's almost a better way to getting our arms around it. So I wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too think it's very different. But we've got a big task ahead. So, yes.
Deputy Mayor, thank you. One of the things that we're doing as staff is you're making comments, and you talked specifically about the code issue and some of the chief brought the enhancements. We're trying to assess your interest in that too, and we'll reflect that in our notes and our budget so that we can come back with some updated numbers. Certainly, for this process, we want to deal with the budget that's been presented, but at the same time, we want to keep a running tally of what this means also so that we can help it, at the end of this, make it easier for you to make a decision.
And I appreciate that. I think the one thing that has always bothered me is, you know, I want to know what they need. Now, whether we can afford it or not, that's a different thing, but at least I know, and I don't have them 2 months down the road coming saying, well, we needed that, and not knowing. I think that's very important to me. Example, I'll use the chief because I'm not going to pick on him. The code compliance officers, we didn't ask for that. And I think it only got brought up because of the summit, you know. But I like to know that, you know, so, and I know they're trying to work within their budget, but it's just, there's some things that they know that they need that they didn't ask for. I know, and they know not to bring us a big wish list, that's been made clear in the last 3 years, but I think it's very important to the council to know if there's really, really a need, so that we don't have to come back, because we've done that in past years and approved something that, you know, caught us off guard. So I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.